Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, December 24th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, expect a high of 62.9 degrees and a low dipping to 60.1, making for a mild Christmas Eve, perfect for holiday gatherings or a stroll under the lights. Coming up, we'll examine the Supreme Court's decision to halt President Trump's plan to send the National Guard to Chicago and its broader implications. We'll also explore how past wildfire damage in California is transforming seasonal rains into hazardous mudslides and debris flows, posing serious risks to communities. Plus, other key stories on global affairs, local impacts, and more. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. A major Supreme Court decision just put new limits on presidential power at home. Reporter Ethan is here to break down what happened and why it matters.
Morning, Grace. Late yesterday, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 order, blocked President Trump from federalizing and deploying roughly 300 National Guard troops to the Chicago area without the governor's consent. The unsigned order came on the so-called shadow docket and left in place a temporary restraining order from a federal district judge in Chicago. According to SCOTUS blog and court documents, the justices said the administration misread a century-old statute and overstepped the line Congress drew between civilian law enforcement and the military.
How did this clash start in Chicago?
It traces back to early October, when protests grew outside an ICE processing site in Broadview, just west of Chicago. The Washington Post and NPR Illinois reported that activists held largely peaceful vigils over detention conditions, though there were confrontations with federal agents using tear gas and pepper balls. The White House painted a much darker picture, calling Chicago lawless, and moved to federalize about 200 Illinois Guard members and another 100 from Texas.
What was the legal hook the White House used?
The administration cited Title 10, Section 12406, a clause rooted in the Militia Act of 1903, to say the president could call up the Guard when regular forces couldn't execute the laws. But, as SCOTUS blog explained, that statute is typically a mechanism, not a standalone permission slip to bypass a governor. The court focused on what regular forces actually means and how that interacts with the Posse Comitatus Act's ban on military policing.
So what did the majority say about regular forces?
They read it as referring to the standing military, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, rather than ICE or Border Patrol. Bloomberg Law noted the court said you can't claim you're unable to use the regular forces to execute the laws when, by statute, those forces are generally barred from domestic law enforcement, unless Congress gives a specific exception. That is where the Insurrection Act usually comes in, and the administration deliberately didn't invoke it.
Why avoid the Insurrection Act?
Politically, declaring an insurrection in a major American city is a heavy step, especially in an election cycle. Legally, the Insurrection Act requires a formal presidential proclamation ordering people to disperse, and often implicates state consent, according to analysis from the Brennan Center and Lawfare. The administration tried to sidestep that by stretching Section 12406, and the court essentially said that attempt was an end run around Congress.
What about the facts on the ground? Was Chicago actually in crisis?
That depends on whom you ask. The White House argued agents faced mob violence, pointing to arrests of people with firearms and damage to vehicles. CBS News and The Guardian reflected that framing in summarizing the government's filings. But local reporting from WTTW, Block Club Chicago, and NPR Illinois described protests that were tense but mostly controlled, with local police and the sheriff's office running a unified command to keep order.
Did local police back that up?
Yes. In testimony cited by the Chicago Sun-Times, Broadview's police chief said his officers were, quote, shell-shocked, end quote, not by protesters but by drifting federal tear gas that forced them to pull back. The ACLU of Illinois called the administration's narrative, quote, pure fantasy, end quote, saying the site has seen peaceful protests for decades without soldiers. Court records reviewed by independent outlets showed the gun arrests involved people with valid licenses who were not threatening agents.
What exactly did the Supreme Court's order do yesterday?
It denied the government's request to lift the lower court's restraining order, which means the federalization move remains frozen. According to Supreme Court.gov's docket and SCOTUS blog, the majority indicated the government hadn't shown a likelihood of success on its interpretation of the statute. Practically, that paralyzed deployments to Chicago and, by ripple effect, to other cities with similar disputes.
Who joined the majority?
Reporting from Bloomberg Law says Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined the three liberal justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, forming the six. It's a notable split in a conservative-leaning court, especially given how many Trump-related emergencies have reached them this year. It signals limits on executive power that cross the court's usual ideological lines.
Was there a separate opinion we should know about?
There was. Justice Brett Kavanaugh concurred, agreeing the block was warranted, while suggesting he might entertain narrower uses of guard call-ups for purely protective roles around federal property. On the other side, Justice Samuel Alito wrote a dissent, joined by Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch, arguing the court should defer more to a president's duty to protect federal officers.
What language stood out in the order?
One line that jumped off the page, as reported by SCOTUS blog, was that, quote, political opposition is not rebellion, end quote. The majority also faulted the administration for lacking a coherent, fact-based justification to bypass state authority, which echoes concerns raised by lower courts in Chicago and Portland. It was a rebuke of the narrative that routine protest turbulence equals an emergency justifying soldiers on city streets.
How did the White House react last night and this morning?
The public stance was defiant but compliant. The Washington Post and CBS News noted President Trump used Truth Social to say Chicago's problems stem from, quote, radical Democrats, end quote, and vowed to push his immigration agenda regardless. A spokesperson told Notice that the ruling, quote, detracts nothing from the president's core agenda, end quote, even as the Pentagon moved to demobilize units.
The Pentagon's demobilizing already?
Yes, the Texas Tribune reported Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed the department would stand down the troops and begin the paperwork by Christmas Eve, which is today. That underscores that, despite the rhetoric, agencies are following the court's directive.
What are Illinois leaders saying?
They're treating it like a guardrail restored. Governor J.B. Pritzker called it a big win for Illinois and for democracy. And Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson applauded what he called a rebuke of militarizing the city. Democracy Docket and NPR Illinois captured those reactions. You could feel the relief from officials who argued they were managing protests without federal troops.
Does this affect other cities immediately?
It does, and we're already seeing it. In Portland, a permanent injunction had already blocked a similar move, and Governor Tina Kotek used last night's decision to demand full state control over roughly 100 Guard members on standby, according to KGW and Aspen Public Radio. In Los Angeles, an earlier order from Judge Charles Breyer ended a deployment, and the Ninth Circuit appeal now looks moot because the Supreme Court's reading undercuts the legal basis for using the Guard in routine policing where local forces are functioning, as the Los Angeles Times explained.
Is Washington, D.C. different?
It is. The president directly controls the D.C. National Guard, which is a unique arrangement, and yesterday's ruling doesn't change that. Bloomberg Law and Lawfare have both noted that distinction, which is why deployments in the district have always followed a different legal path.
Can the administration try another path here?
Legally, they could pivot to the Insurrection Act, which explicitly allows using the military to execute the laws in limited circumstances, or rely more on the Federal Protective Service under a separate statute to guard federal buildings. But Lawfare points out the Insurrection Act carries significant political and procedural hurdles, including a mandatory proclamation and, often, the optics of accusing a city of rebellion. The court's message was clear: if you want to use troops domestically for law enforcement, you need the specific authorization Congress provided, not a creative reading of an old militia clause.
What happens to the 300 Guard members tied to Chicago?
They're going home. Demobilization started as early as today, with Illinois and Texas units stepping back from federal orders, according to the Texas Tribune and CBS News. The Chicago deployment is effectively over unless the administration shifts to a permitted authority or the facts change dramatically.
You mentioned the press was targeted during protests. Did the courts address that?
They did at the district level. WTTW and the Chicago Headline Club highlighted a restraining order from Judge Sarah Ellis that barred federal agents from assaulting or arresting journalists covering the protests. That pattern of excessive force against the press became part of the larger narrative that the federal response escalated tensions rather than calming them.
How unusual is it for this court to side against the Trump administration?
It's not unheard of, but it is notable in an emergency posture. Bloomberg Law's year-end review points to a wave of litigation this year where the administration lost on due process and detention issues, and this case now stands out as a structural check on executive power. The alignment here, Roberts and Barrett with the liberals, underscores how statutory limits can reorder the usual ideological blocks.
What are conservative voices saying in response?
Some conservative outlets, like WCBI, framed the decision as undermining national security and tying the president's hands. Justice Alito's dissent captured that view, warning that federal officers could be exposed to, quote, potentially lethal attacks, end quote, if presidents can't surge help. That debate, security versus civil liberty boundaries, will continue, but for now the majority has drawn a firm statutory line.
Does this change anything about immigration enforcement itself?
Not directly. ICE and Border Patrol can still enforce federal law, and the Federal Protective Service can still guard buildings. What changes, as the Brennan Center notes, is the off-ramp to use state guard units over a governor's objection for routine policing, which the court says is not what Section 12406 authorizes.
How significant is this for federal-state relations?
It's a reminder that the National Guard is a hybrid force, state-controlled unless properly federalized under clear statutory triggers. The Constitution Center's historical reviews have described that balance as central to federalism since the Dick Act era. Yesterday's order reinforces that balance, telling presidents that state consent or the Insurrection Act, with all its baggage, are the lanes for domestic deployments.
Could Congress step in and change the law?
It could. Lawmakers could clarify Section 12406, tighten or expand the Insurrection Act, or create a narrower protective authority for federal facilities during protests. But, as Bloomberg Law's analysis suggests, in a polarized Congress, sweeping changes are unlikely soon, which means the court's interpretation will govern the near term.
What should people watch for next?
Watch for whether the Justice Department files any new motions in the Chicago case, or abandons appeals in Los Angeles and Portland. Also look for internal guidance from the Pentagon on when guard federalization is appropriate, and for state attorneys general like Oregon's Dan Rayfield, pressing to unwind any remaining standby orders. And keep an eye on whether the administration tests the Federal Protective Service option more aggressively, which has fewer political tripwires.
Lastly, give us the big picture. Why does this matter beyond Chicago?
It's a constitutional gut check in the middle of a heated immigration crackdown. By saying political opposition is not rebellion, the court signaled that protest, even loud protest, doesn't automatically trigger military solutions. According to the Washington Post and SCOTUS blog, the ruling narrows the emergency toolkit and forces presidents to own the political costs of invoking the Insurrection Act if they truly believe a rebellion exists.
Ethan, thanks for walking us through it on a busy Christmas Eve.
My pleasure, Grace. And given the timing, just one day after the ruling, cities across the country are already adjusting while the legal dust settles. We'll keep tracking the fallout through the holiday and beyond.
It's Christmas Eve, and Southern California is getting hammered by a powerful atmospheric river. Chloe is with us. What's the big picture right now?
Grace, this is a classic Pineapple Express, tapping warm tropical moisture and unloading it across the state. Meteorologists are calling it one of the most intense winter storms in recent memory, and the National Weather Service in Los Angeles says rainfall rates in the foothills and mountains are hitting roughly 1/2 to 1.5 inches an hour. The Washington Post and Los Angeles Times report coastal and valley totals could stack up to 4 to 8 inches by Friday, which is the day after Christmas tomorrow, and the higher elevations could see 8 to 12 inches or more. That's the recipe for dangerous flash flooding and, most worrisome, debris flows on wildfire burn scars.
Let's start there. Why are debris flows such a big concern tonight?
Debris flows are not just muddy water. They're fast-moving slurries of water, mud, rocks, and even boulders that can move at highway speeds. Jason Keene with the U.S. Geological Survey described them as, quote, a flood on steroids, end quote, in interviews cited by the Associated Press and CBS News. According to CalMatter's environmental reporting, soils in recent burn areas can become hydrophobic, meaning water just runs off, gathering sediment and momentum. The USGS estimates burned slopes can generate up to 10 times more debris per acre than unburned terrain, and tonight's 1-inch-an-hour bursts are right at the critical threshold.
Which burn scars are most at risk during this storm?
The January fires left fresh scars above communities like Altadena, Pasadena, and Sierra Madre, where the Eaton fire burned steep terrain. On the west side, the Palisades fire in Pacific Palisades and Mandeville Canyon stripped hillsides that drain into tight canyons. State's newsroom warned yesterday that Los Angeles County alone saw more than 100,000 acres burn in 2025, and there's, as they put it, plenty of loose material primed to move. With this storm peaking today into tomorrow, those slopes are vulnerable.
Are people being told to get out now?
Yes, Los Angeles County has issued mandatory evacuation orders for roughly 380 to 400 high-risk properties in the Eaton, Palisades, Kenneth, and Sunset burn scars, according to My News LA and KESQ. There are broader evacuation warnings in Altadena, the Palisades, Mandeville Canyon, and areas near Runyon Canyon through at least Thursday evening. Deputies and officers have been going door to door, and the county put those zones under a Phase 2 mudflow forecast, which means moderate debris flows capable of blocking streets and damaging structures. Officials are stressing that these flows can strike with little warning.
Where can evacuees go tonight?
Shelters are open. For Palisades evacuees, the Stoner Recreation Center in West Los Angeles is taking people in. In the Eaton area, the Santa Anita Family YMCA in Monrovia is open, and West Ranch High School is serving broader Santa Clarita impacts. Ready LA and Cal OES updates, cited by the San Francisco Chronicle, point people to protect.genesis.com for interactive maps, weather.gov/locks for National Weather Service alerts, the county mudflow forecast page at dpw.lacounty.gov/wrd/forecast, and road closures at dpw.lacounty.gov/road closures.
How intense is the storm on that atmospheric river scale?
Scientists classify these events on a 1 to 5 scale, and this one is running about a category 3 to 4, which means moderate to extreme intensity. The Los Angeles office of the National Weather Service says we're seeing rare dynamics for December, including embedded thunderstorms and even a small chance of tornadoes as the cold front sweeps in. Winds could gust up to around 70 miles per hour in exposed areas, which can topple trees on saturated ground. And in the Sierra, passes like Donner's Summit have seen near whiteout conditions since the weekend, with travel nearly impossible at times, according to CBS News.
You mentioned holiday timing. How is travel holding up?
Not well. Caltrans and AAA told KTLA and CBS that with an estimated 10.2 million Southern Californians on the move, this is the worst possible moment for a storm like this to stall. Officials are urging people to delay non-essential trips, especially on canyon and mountain roads where rockfalls and closures are common tonight. At the airports, San Diego International and San Francisco International have been dealing with ground delays affecting thousands of travelers nationwide.
Is this unusual for Christmas week, or are we seeing a pattern?
There's a pattern. CalMatters points out that atmospheric rivers deliver roughly 80% of California's major floods, and climate change is loading them with more moisture. Earlier this month, a series of rivers in the sky dumped nearly 5 trillion gallons on Washington state, as ground news aggregated from multiple outlets. Warmer air holds more water, so when these plumes hit the mountains, they squeeze out bigger deluges.
How are officials preparing on the ground around Los Angeles?
Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency and mobilized more than 225 state personnel, including 45 fire engines and 10 swiftwater rescue teams, prepositioned in Los Angeles, Ventura, and San Bernardino counties. Cal OES says the California National Guard is on standby with high-water vehicles and aviation for search and rescue. Los Angeles County Public Works maintains about 200 debris basins countywide, with 19 alone in the Eaton watershed, and crews pre-excavated them before the storm to maximize capacity. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, under Task Force Phoenix, cleared more than 4.5 million tons of debris after the January fires and sprayed hydro-mulch on scorched slopes to stabilize soil.
Do those measures really work when the rain gets this heavy?
They can help, but they're not foolproof. The Washington Post, drawing on USGS analyses, noted that after the 2020 Bobcat fire, basins like Oak Glade and K-Rails captured most sediment during later atmospheric rivers, sparing Monrovia homes even though parks took hits. Similarly, after the 2018 Woolsey fire, hydroseeding and fiber rolls helped reduce erosion during 2019 storms, even as Pacific Coast Highway saw closures. But Keene and other USGS experts caution that during an AR4 event with 8 to 12 inches possible, those basins can fill in a single pulse if rain rates spike, and evacuation remains the most reliable safeguard.
Are we already seeing impacts in Northern California?
We are. Streets in San Francisco flooded quickly as the first waves came through, with storm drains overwhelmed by intense bursts, according to the Los Angeles Times and AP reports collected by Ground News. The Sierra Nevada picked up heavy snow, and Caltrans has intermittently closed mountain passes for safety. That northern punch began Sunday, 2 days ago, and the core moved south by early this morning.
What timeline should Southern Californians expect from here?
The worst of the rain in Los Angeles County looks to peak from tonight into early Christmas Day, with showers lingering through Friday, which is December 26th. The National Weather Service says another impulse may keep showers going into the weekend, but the highest risk for debris flows is tied to those 1-inch-an-hour cloudbursts through tomorrow morning. Coastal and valley areas may get brief lulls, but foothills and burn scars can light up quickly. That's why continuous monitoring of alerts is critical tonight.
Speaking of alerts, what's the best way for people to stay informed?
The county's protect.genesis.com site lets you search your address to see if you're in an evacuation zone or a burn scar risk area. The National Weather Service in Los Angeles posts frequent updates at weather.gov/locks and on X at @NWS Los Angeles. Ready LA at ready.lacounty.gov has emergency checklists, and the county's mudflow forecast and road closure pages are being updated several times a day. Cal OES says their operations center is staffed around the clock, and their news page at news.calos.ca.gov has statewide updates.
Have there been casualties or rescues tied to this system already?
Unfortunately, yes. Cal OES has linked at least one death since Saturday to flash flooding in the broader storm window leading up to today. First responders have carried out multiple water rescues in creeks and on flooded roadways, especially where drivers tried to cross moving water. Officials keep repeating the same warning: turn around, don't drown.
What are you hearing on tornado potential in Southern California?
It's rare, but not impossible in strong winter storms. The Washington Post notes that with a sharp cold front and wind shear, a brief waterspout or weak tornado can spin up, especially near the coast or in the San Gabriel Valley during embedded thunderstorms. The National Weather Service is watching that, but the broader threat remains damaging straight-line winds and lightning. Any thunderstorm tonight can quickly push rainfall rates past that critical threshold on the slopes.
Why are the burns from January still causing problems 11 months later?
Vegetation recovery on steep chaparral hillsides can take several seasons, and root systems that stabilize soil don't come back quickly. Cal Matters. Rachel Becker explains that burned soils become water repellent so raindrops don't soak in. They accelerate downslope, picking up ash, gravel, and boulders. Even with hydromulch and wattles, very intense bursts can blow past those treatments. That's why communities below fresh scars remain on edge through at least 2 rainy seasons.
What signals should people watch for if they haven't evacuated?
Authorities say if you hear a sudden roar like a freight train, see fast-rising, muddy water, or notice unusual cracking or movement on a slope, you need to get to higher ground immediately. The AP and CBS News emphasize that debris flows move faster than you can run, and they don't behave like water-only floods. Cal OES has been blunt, saying, quote, "Get out of the way," end quote, because once it starts, the window to act is tiny. Better yet, follow evacuation orders before those signs appear.
Are utilities and power outages a concern tonight?
Yes, with 70-mile-per-hour gusts possible on ridgelines and trees rooted in saturated soil, we could see more outages as lines come down. The Los Angeles Times reports crews are staged, but restoration can be slowed by flooding and mud. If you rely on medical devices, officials urge you to charge backup batteries and have a plan to reach a powered location if needed.
How is the storm different from the big ones we saw earlier this year?
2 things: the fresh burn scars from January and the holiday timing. The meteorology is similar to other AR 3 or 4 events, but the overlap with such vulnerable terrain increases the chance of debris flows. And as the Washington Post notes, with more people traveling and hiking during the holidays, there's more exposure. That combination elevates risk, even if the rainfall totals resemble previous storms.
Is there any silver lining, like help for our reservoirs?
There is some good news. These storms refill reservoirs and boost snowpack, which helps water supply into spring, as Cal Matters points out. The challenge is capturing that water safely while minimizing flood damage. Managers will be juggling reservoir releases to maintain flood space, which can look counterintuitive when we're also talking drought.
What about coastal flooding with these winds and tides?
Coastal flooding and high surf are in the mix, especially around high tide cycles tonight and tomorrow morning. The National Weather Service has coastal flood advisories up for vulnerable beach and harbor areas, where onshore winds and storm surge can push water into low-lying roads and parking lots. Coupled with heavy rain, that can impede drainage in seaside neighborhoods. It's another reason officials are telling people to avoid shoreline drives.
Are schools or city services changing plans for Christmas Day?
Some city facilities have adjusted hours, and a few park closures near canyons were extended through tomorrow, according to local advisories cited by the Los Angeles Times. The bigger question is road access. If debris basins need clearing or if culverts clog, crews may close canyon routes into Thursday. People planning holiday hikes in the foothills should postpone and stay off saturated trails. Search and rescue teams do not want to be out there during peak runoff.
We've talked a lot about Los Angeles. What about Ventura and San Bernardino counties?
Ventura County sits downwind of the Santa Ynez and Topatopa ranges, where orographic lift can dump extra rain, so they're also under the gun tonight. San Bernardino's foothills, including the San Gabriel's eastern flanks, have steep drainages that can funnel debris quickly into neighborhoods and onto freeways. Cal OES says rescue teams and engine strike teams are staged in both counties. People there should follow the same playbook on alerts and evacuations.
For drivers already out, what's the best advice?
If you're on the road and hit ponding or moving water, turn around and find higher routes. Don't try to gauge depth at night. Caltrans suggests avoiding canyon shortcuts and sticking to main freeways, where closures and detours are better managed. Keep an eye on the department's social feeds and changeable message signs for closures, and expect slower commutes well into tomorrow. AAA told CBS News to carry extra water, warm clothing, and a charged phone in case you get stuck.
Are we hearing anything from hospitals or first responders about capacity?
Hospitals are prepared for weather-related injuries, but the bigger coordination is among fire, sheriff, and public works for swiftwater and hillside incidents. The state's Emergency Operations Center said today that they're at a high posture, and mutual aid is ready if rescues spike overnight. The San Francisco Chronicle noted that during earlier storms, resource sharing helped keep response times reasonable, even as call volumes rose. Tonight's goal is to preempt emergencies with evacuations rather than chase them.
For folks feeling anxious, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
Listen to the alerts and take them seriously, especially in burn scar areas. Debris flows strike fast, and the best defense is not being in their path. Keep your devices charged, keep your car fueled, and know your route to a shelter or higher ground. And monitor weather.gov/locks for the latest watches and warnings through tomorrow morning.
Chloe, last thing, when might conditions finally ease for most of us?
The heaviest banding should lift east by late on Christmas Day, but showers and gusty winds linger into Friday, December 26th. We may still see localized flooding where soils are saturated and basins are full, so it won't be an all clear right away. By the weekend, the system weakens and crews can make headway clearing debris and reopening roads. That said, burn scar vigilance will continue with any new squalls that pop up.
All right, we'll keep checking those updates. Chloe, thanks for breaking it down on a very busy night.
Thank you, Grace. Stay safe, everyone, and keep an eye on those alerts.
Here are some other headlines. The U.S. economy put the vroom in boom, growing at a 4.3% annualized clip in the third quarter of 2025, the fastest in 2 years, per a delayed BEA report finally released December 23rd after a 43-day shutdown put the numbers in park. Consumers floored it with a 3.5% spending surge. Auto dealers especially felt the pre-tariff tailwind, while exports rebounded 8.8% and government outlays held steady, easily topping 3.2% forecasts. The catch? Core inflation is still cruising at 2.9%, keeping the Fed's foot light on the rate cut pedal. Markets now expect just one cut in 2026. Economists warn the fourth quarter may downshift as shutdown scars and shifting trade rules filter through, with some calling the performance K-shaped, as strength and strain ride in the same lane. A sea change on safety. U.S. crime rates plunged in 2025, with murders down a historic 20% and broad declines across major categories. The Real-Time Crime Index and the Council on Criminal Justice chart the fall, while the FBI says violent crime arrests nearly doubled to about 14,000 in the administration's first year, crediting a pivot to local support. Analysts call it a return to pre-pandemic normal, and NORC researchers say it's the sharpest single-year improvement in nearly 30 years. Property crime cooled too. Motor vehicle thefts slid 24%. Still, watchdogs warn that early 2025 cuts to community safety grants could take the air out of the tires heading into 2026. The policy road may now shift from emergency triage to long-haul community investment. In immigration, a new quota is raising big questions about the meaning of naturalized and secured. Internal guidance directs USCIS field offices to refer 100 to 200 denaturalization cases a month to the Justice Department in fiscal year 2026, up to 400 annually, compared with roughly 120 total from 2017 to 2025. A spokesperson frames it as a war on fraud to restore integrity. Critics warn that turning a rare legal tool into a numbers game risks chilling 26 million naturalized Americans, even as the government must still meet a high legal bar in federal court. For many, citizenship now feels less like a finish line and more like a moving goalpost. 19 states and the District of Columbia are suing HHS and Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., seeking to block a federal declaration that deems youth puberty blockers and hormone therapies unsafe, and ineffective, and threatens to exclude providers offering such care from Medicare and Medicaid. Led by New York Attorney General Letitia James, the coalition argues the administration short-circuited the rulemaking process with a de facto ban, sidestepping the notice and comment steps required by law. Filed in federal court in Eugene, Oregon, the suit seeks an immediate injunction as related rules undergo review through February 2026. Hospitals and medical associations warn the move injects uncertainty into care for thousands of transgender youth. At the UN, diplomacy hit the brakes and tapped the horn. The Security Council heard that Iran nuclear talks are at a total stalemate following the snapback of international sanctions, even as members united to demand de-escalation in Yemen and condemned Houthi detentions of aid and diplomatic staff. In a rare unanimous note, the Council extended peacekeeping in the Democratic Republic of Congo through 2026 and renewed backing for the African Union mission in Somalia. Meanwhile, Russia and China accused the U.S. of cowboy behavior on Venezuela. With non-proliferation on the line, the world now watches whether zero enrichment demands drive the JCPOA framework into the ditch or toward a fresh lane for talks. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.